Hi, folks. This is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report. You know, one of the things that we all are aware of is that there's all kinds of plastic, soft plastic lures to use, and I've talked about them so much that I try to think of what would be different, what would be new to tell you about. Well, let me be very specific. One of the guys he put on our sports show that we had 3 years ago in Messina in the winter. It was the first time we ever tried it, and then COVID hit. But his name is Dan Kenny, and he was a baseball player when he was younger. I mean, a pro baseball player, and then he started fishing for a living. Well, I was talking to Dan at the last show I went to, and the show had finished, and we were having breakfast before we all set off to go home. And I said, Dan, I remember when you came up to Messina and I had Jonathan Robala take you out fishing. And you kept saying to Jonathan and me that you believed that Keitech soft plastic baits were the best. I said, do you still feel that way? And, Dan has got all these different vendors that come to his show, and he's got to be careful what he promotes and doesn't promote because he wants everybody to try to be successful anyway. But he said, well, here's the secret to that Keitech lure. He says, the plastic is very soft. A lot of people really, they go on about it because they tend to go through so many lures because it doesn't take many fish to chew up that plastic. It's so soft. But because it's so soft, it tends to shimmer and shake and do things in the water that some of the other plastics don't because of the softness of it. Now, we're talking right now, Keitech makes a paddle tail, little 3 and 4 and 5 inch, it depends on what size you want to buy, paddle tail soft plastic bait. And it looks a lot like other ones. But because of the type of plastic that they use, can really make a big difference in how that lure is in the water. And I thought of other things that I wanted to pass on to you. We talk about, okay, let's use a paddle tail. You can get a soft plastic bait like this that will either have a fork tail or a paddle tail. They're going to look completely different in the water. The fork tail isn't going to have that tail wagging in the water that's going to draw fish, but it might look more natural. It might give you a chance to sort of work it like a jerk bait where you can just jerk the rod and it'll dart a lot more. But there's so many other things that you should be aware of. You can take the same, let's go back to the Keitech 3 or 4 inch plastic bait with a paddle tail. The way you put it on a hook will determine how it goes through the water. If you use just a regular single hook that's designed for worms and rig it Texas style, you'll be able to fish it through a lot of weeds and so forth, but it's going to sink down in the water and it's going to react differently than if you take it and put it on a jig head, which is a lead or tungsten based. There's weight there at the hook. And that's going to make it sink and cast. It's going to sink down more. It's going to cast out farther because it's got more weight. But it's going to go through the water differently. The weight is going to drive the head down a bit as you're reeling it. It's going to make it swim like a different type of animal. Then there's different jig heads now that are different shaped. And they will allow that bait to either swivel or do different things. Here's my point. There's a number of different ways that you can attach that to your line. And depending on how you attach it will make it look a very unique way. So you can take the same bait and fish it a number of different ways. But I wanted you to be aware that the consistency of the plastic, the soft plastic that's used in these baits, can make a tremendous difference. You can have 2 baits look exactly the same by different companies, the same length, the same color. They both have a paddle tail, and yet one's going to swim through the water completely differently than the other because of the consistency of the plastic. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report.